This video is about how you can actually implement Charlie Kirk's words, his teachings into your life, especially for young men. If you are a fan of his or you're just now seeing his content after him being assassinated, you might be wondering, like, wow, this is amazing teachings. Like, how can I actually, what does this mean for my life that he's gone now? How do I actually implement these things? I'm going to briefly talk about what Charlie Kirk's message is for especially young men, and then I'm going to talk about how to actually implement that into your life. Because if we do not make changes or implement the things that he taught, then his death would have been for nothing. Now, if you're not familiar, Charlie Kirk's message for young men is basically all about traditional old values of Christianity, masculinity, becoming a better version of yourself so that you can provide for your family, so you can get married, have children, provide for them, keep them safe. And to do that, getting rid of all your bad habits. He says to stop smoking, stop drinking, stop wasting your time playing video games, whatever that addiction is. And that's what I want to focus on in this video, because addiction, whether you want to use that word or not, you could call it a bad habit, those things are very hard to quit. And so I want to give you some tools for how to actually overcome those things if your goal is to have a family one day, as it was for me. And that was the main thing that held me back from getting married and having children, was I had all these bad habits. But eventually I was able to change those and start my family. And so before we get into the tools, we need to understand how addiction actually works. So very quickly, for those who don't know, addiction and bad habits have everything to do with what's called dopamine in your brain. So dopamine is a neurotransmitter that has to do with your motivation and pleasure, your ability to pursue goals. And so when we pursue things and engage in activities, we receive dopamine. And so in our modern world, there's so many things that spike our dopamine unnaturally. Things like drugs, technology, gaming, different substances. And these things, they spike our dopamine, make us feel really good. And so we teach our brain to crave those things more and more. And so what happens though, when we engage in these things and spike our dopamine, we get this crash. And so this is like our baseline level of dopamine. That's like just what we have all the time. But when we spike our dopamine, we get this crash below our baseline. And this means we have low motivation. We don't feel motivated to do things that require effort. All we want to do is spike our dopamine again with those easy things that take very little effort. And so this leaves us not wanting to do things that are difficult, that will actually improve our lives. So this is the situation I found myself in, where I was just addicted to technology and food, and I didn't want to study, I didn't want to work out, I couldn't become the person that would be able to provide for my future family. And so the question is, how do we get back up here? Now, the way we get back up here is simple but not easy. And it's really just time. If we give our body time, we will replenish that dopamine, and then we will feel that motivation again to do those more difficult things. The reason this is so difficult is when our dopamine is so low, we crave these things so much, and so we want to keep spiking our dopamine. But if we keep doing that, it keeps crashing lower and lower. And so the question is, how do we give ourselves time without spiking our dopamine again? First thing you're going to want to think about is actually replacing these addictive bad habits, instant gratification, whatever you want to call them. So, for example, Charlie Kirk says to young men, stop watching pornography. Okay, how do we replace pornography? As an example, and one of the main reasons that we engage in pornography is because of the social connection that we believe it's giving us, and that desire for intimacy that it's X. Um, so let's take pornography. Now, for example, Charlie Kirk, one of the habits he tells us to quit is pornography. So how would we replace pornography? And so we want to think about what is the desire behind the bad habit. And so the desire behind pornography is for intimacy, and that's a wholly just, normal desire, but it's being satisfied in a way that's spiking our dopamine unnaturally and doesn't take effort. And so, how do we replace that? We replace that with real, in person, social connection and intimacy. Working towards creating friends, building relationships, that's gonna be a proper replacement for pornography. Let's take another example with video games. The video game satisfies a lot of normal desires in us young men, the desire to progress, to learn different skills, to improve ourselves and help other people. Now, we can satisfy these desires in other ways. For example, Charlie Kirk says, join a church. This is the big replacement for me when I was addicted to video games, was going on a mission for my church. That required me to learn a lot of different skills that replaced my desire to learn skills in video games and progress in that way. So this is going to be very personal to you, thinking about, why do I engage in these addictive habits and how can I replace them? Now, the second tool I want to give you is a term stolen from exercise called progressive overload. So there's two ways to go about actually replacing your bad habits. You can do it all at once. That's called going like cold turkey, doing like a dopamine detox. And now that is going to be the fastest way to restore that healthy baseline level of dopamine. But that's not going to be possible for most people. That's extremely difficult. And you're going to need other tools to help you to do that, which you can watch my other videos for. But for most people, they're going to want to gradually replace their old habits. And so we can do that through what's called like progressive overload. You can think about it like in the gym. You push yourself, almost to your limit, break down your muscles, and they come back stronger. Now you continue to do that and you're able to lift heavier and heavier weight. Now, in a similar way with our habits, we're going to start off with what we can manage. Maybe that's, if we're playing video games for 5 hours a day, tomorrow we're going to try replacing one of those hours with a different activity, such as studying if you're in college, for example. And then over time, we'll increase that until eventually we get to a point where we've completely replaced our bad habit, if that's our goal, or to a point where we feel good about the time we spend with that old habit. And you want to start off by doing this in the morning, because in the morning your dopamine has had time to replenish somewhat, and so you're going to feel most motivated then. So you're going to want to engage in those habits that you're trying to do more of in your life. So if you're trying to study more, do that in the morning. You're going to, as you continually do this, you're going to feel more motivated and enjoy that hard work. All right, the third and final tool I want to give you is accountability. And so I'm not talking about just sharing your goals with someone, but having real accountability with someone who is going to check in with you about how you're making progress. And so we can see this in a few ways in Charlie Kirk's message. He tells us to go to church. He encourages people to get involved in his organization, and being around these like-minded individuals in a way is going to keep you accountable. And you can take that even further when you work with someone, when you become friends with someone, and you share your goals with them. You have them check in with you. And you can take this even further by having some sort of reward that you give yourself when you reach your goals. And for example, using the example from earlier, if your goal was to study for 1 hour, then you could have some sort of reward for yourself if you accomplish that. Whether that be some sort of food you like or an activity that you enjoy that's not addicting. And you can have your accountability partner make sure that you don't give yourself that reward unless you actually reach your goal. So I hope these 3 tools give you a good starting place as you're trying to maybe implement Charlie Kirk's words, overcome your addictions, and become the person that you know you can be. If you want a more personal game plan for your situation and bad habits, then I'd love to chat with you, and you can click the link in the description. But otherwise, please subscribe, and we'll be making more videos like this.